Welcome back to AP U.S. History. This is Chapter 24. We're talking about the Great Depression. We were talking about some of the causes for the Great Depression. Certainly, uneven distribution of wealth. 5% of the population received 30% of the total income. Interesting fact, you can only buy so many steaks and so many houses and so many cars. You need to have cash in a lot of people's pockets to keep the economy moving. We also looked at some of the weaker industries like cotton because of synthetic fibers taking its place. Um, Certainly, there were a lot of speculative loans that banks were making in the stock market, and when it crashed, it took a lot of life savings with them. Bank went bankrupt, couldn't pay their depositors. Um, Certainly, there was overproduction in some certain sectors of the economy, and they were laying people off in order to sell off the merchandise. But when they laid people off, then it was almost a snowball effect. Then they don't have a paycheck to buy other products, and it goes on and on. Certainly, credit was overextended, and people were buying things on time. It's all well and good, but if you can't afford the items that you're buying because you've lost your job, you're going to go bankrupt, and they repossess what you have. Um, so, wages in industrial workers and farmers remained relatively low during the 20s, and many of them couldn't afford to buy some of the products. Unstable banking, too many bad loans, over speculation, mismanagement. Depositors' money was put at risk, and when banks failed, the people lost their life savings. Once a bank closes its doors, it isn't going to reopen. It's gone bankrupt. So millions are going to lose their savings, life savings, due to bank mismanagement. Weak international markets because the United States will raise its tariffs, so will other countries. So it makes it more expensive for overseas buyers to purchase American goods. They do that in retaliation for the tariffs that we place on their products. And so these protective tariffs, although they thought that we're going to help American businesses, really backfire because other countries are going to do the same thing. Now, what did Hoover do in response to the Great Depression? Well, he said, stay the course. We'll make it. And he did nothing. The poor were looking for help and no ideas how to correct the situation. When your children don't have bread and milk to drink, they don't care who the president is and whatever fancy slogans he might have. They want some results. They want a job and they want to feed their kids. What about the people? Farmers already feeling the effects they had for quite a number of years. People couldn't afford the luxury items. Factories shut down. Businesses go out of business. Banks can't pay their money. People can't pay their taxes. In fact, some places in the United States, schools shut down because they depended on taxpayers to pay their property tax, but they couldn't, so they couldn't pay the teachers, so they closed the schools down. And a lot of Americans will become homeless and live in shanties. Everyone seemed to be affected by the Great Depression. Not only were there people unemployed, but underemployed. People weren't working a full week. Wages were cut. It wasn't until President Roosevelt takes over that he tells the people that he can get things on his feet, and this offers some glimmer of hope for the unemployed. He Hoover believed that economic consequences of World War I were part of the reason for the Great Depression. International problems need to be fixed first. Too many inflationary public works programs to ease unemployment. So he wasn't going to come up with any more road building or bridge building or what have you to keep people back to work. He believed in a balanced budget, but during this time, an unbalanced budget increased for the federal debt. In fact, he's going to be criticized by Roosevelt for putting America in debt. It's interesting to note that Roosevelt, when he becomes president, puts America 10 times more in debt than Hoover. So I guess the kid will call him the pot black. In this response to the farmers, he did try to get the Agricultural Market Act passed by Congress in 1929 to help the farmers. It was designed to build farmer co-ops where they would cut back on the amount of food and cattle that they and other animals they were raising to bring the prices back. And it also gave the federal government a chance to buy up some of the surpluses. The Federal Farm Board, established in 1930 with $500 million, lent, bought, and stored agricultural surpluses. The goal was to help the sagging prices. But farmers continued to overproduce, and it just defeated the whole purpose of the program. So this program did not work. His response to business, he wanted to increase the tariff. The Harley-Smoot tariff of 1930 was raised to protect American businesses. He called on voluntarism, that is, people were supposed to keep people working and workers were not supposed to go on strike. But this doesn't work because businesses can't operate in the red. They have to shut down. They have to cut wages. They have to close their doors. He urged Americans to give to the people in need through charities. Now, you have to understand, philosophically, he is not going to give any money directly to people because he believes that will destroy their work ethic. So this voluntarism is his solution. Supported some public work projects, but not enough. Much of the money that was raised was never spent. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, FRC, was formed. This was to give loans, low-cost loans, to businesses. It was created in 1932, certainly at the height of the Great Depression. Things are bad in America. It was authorized to lend up to $1.5 billion to railroads, big businesses, insurance companies, so forth, banks, but they just never spent the money. And if you don't spend the money, it certainly isn't going to get the economy going. Later, legislation from Congress authorized the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to loan $300 million to states and public works projects, but again, too little, too late. This is all done to help prevent businesses from collapsing. One of the criticisms of Hoover was he was all for helping the rich guy only and not the poor guy. The Norris-LaGuardia Anti-Injunction Act was passed in 1932. It was supposed to be a boost to workers. It outlawed yellow dog contracts, which forced workers not to form unions. Forbade federal courts to issue injunctions to restrain strikes, boycotts, and peaceful picketing. So this is a victory for unions coming from the federal government. Refused to give direct federal relief to the poor. Again, he believed in this rugged individualism. He did put a moratorium on international debts, hoping that France and Great Britain and other countries would buy American goods. So he was hoping to stimulate trade. He was hoping that Germany's economy would come about, but it's a slow go. The Bonus Army, these were veterans who fought in World War I. There were about 14,000 unemployed veterans. They marched on D.C. in 1932. They set up a shanty town outside of the capital, and they wanted to get their bonuses that they were promised to be paid in 1945, although they said, hey, how about paying us now? At Hoover's insistence, the Senate would not approve the bill, and about half of the veterans went home. But the other 7,000 stayed. This is the election year for Hoover in 1932. This is a black eye for him. because he will call out the federal troops to disband this shanty town in D.C., and some people will be killed, and he will appear as though he's heartless to the poor, and poor people are not going to vote him back into the presidency. It's probably pretty much one of the nails that would put into his coffin. When you're seen as unsympathetic to the poor and unemployed, they're not going to support you for president. 5,000 to 6,000 veterans camped out there, and again, 2 people were killed, and the camps were destroyed. And he's seen as a heartless cad. And this is going to add to his defeat in 1932 in the election. Some of Hoover's policy helped pave the way for the New Deal, the FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and America is looking for a new vision. This shows Douglas MacArthur, who was the commander of the Pacific during World War II. He was the general in charge of destroying the camp and rooting people out. FDR is inaugurated in 1933. He says he has a New Deal, but really he's bluffing. Some of the things going on, the poor sections of Harlem, 50% of the population was unemployed. Everyone is saying, "Yay, Frankie, we know you can do it." And so people are looking to something to change in D.C. and America to put it back on its feet. Other things that are happening during this time, certainly for blacks, it's a tough time. The Jim Crow laws are still in existence. The Scottsburg trial, where 15 blacks are accused by 2 white women of raping them. No evidence. Eventually they're released, but it shows that Americans are prejudiced against blacks. Certainly blacks are least equipped to survive the Great Depression. Most of them are sharecroppers. They live in the South. Jim Crow laws simply said that you couldn't frequent the same places as white people. Schools, theaters, restaurants, and so forth. Laws were instituted in 1896. This is Plessy versus Ferguson, where it said there'd be separate but equal facilities. This shows the Scottsburg trial. 2 women supposedly raped. These men were all condemned to die, but none were in the end. The trials went on for nearly 15 years before all the men were released from jail. The trial caused a great uproar among the black community because they felt that blacks were not getting justice in America. As far as Hoover's foreign policy, China is flexing its muscles in Manchuria. He says it violates the League of Nations covenant. Eventually, the Japanese will walk out of the League of Nations, and they will continue acquiring territory in China. Hoover took no action. He just did a lot of talking. He said he would not fight a war in Asia, continue this isolation policy. And so he will continue this appeasement of tyrants, and it will come back to haunt America. This shows the Americans taking over Manchuria in 1932. The Hoover-Stinson doctrine was declared. It said that we wouldn't recognize any of the territory acquired by Japan by force. Of course, this doesn't make the Japanese very happy. America would not commit to collective security to stop people like Hitler and Mussolini, and they continued to grow. The U.S. will not recognize any territorial acquisitions. This is on the Hoover-Stinson doctrine. And the Japanese weren't too happy about that. Eventually they will bomb Shanghai, and we're still not going to do anything about it. We practice the good neighbor policy, that is, that we will not intervene in Latin American affairs. So this makes us look like we have changed our ways. We are not going to carry a big stick and beat it about on people's heads. And so that's the end.